In 2020, I moved back to the Rochester area from Ithaca, where I had been teaching at Ithaca College for several years, ultimately receiving tenure as an associate professor. In 2020, Sarah transitioned from academia to a focus on horticulture through hands-on learning. She began working for Ted Hildebrandt of Cold Pond Nursery to learn more about cuttings, grafting, and greenhouse growing. For the past several years, Sarah has worked for Jim Engel of White Oak Nursery in Canandaigua, who runs an operation off the grid and specializes in native perennial shrubs and trees. Her position in plant propagation, uh, her position is in plant propagation, but she is involved in all aspects of the nursery. After doing some freelance eco design work, Sarah realized there are very few options for places to buy the native plants here in Monroe County. She's from Rochester now. This past year, Sarah started her own home-based New York State licensed nursery called Spice Bush Swallowtail Native Plants, with a focus on using local ecotype seed to grow plants. In 2023, she completed her Ontario County Master Gardener program, and she speaks regularly about horticulture with the community. Her passion is around biodiversity that comes from starting plant from seed and helping people support nature through backyard eco design. And that is lovely. I'm going to let one more person into the waiting room and hand it off to Sarah for the slideshow. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah. So the title of my talk tonight is called Hand Harvesting Native Perennial Seed. So small scale seed processing for biodiversity. So I'm going to start with some basics here. What is a seed? We all kind of think we know what that is. We eat them. They're all around us. But what is it actually? So a seed refers to the fertilized, matured ovule that comprises an embryo or a miniature undeveloped plant and food reserves, all enclosed within a protective seed coat. So orchids have some of the smallest seeds. You can see here, it's almost like a powder, whereas this sea coconut tree is massive and huge, larger than a human head. The three main parts of a seed are the cotyledon, which become the first leaves of the seedling when the seed germinates or begins to grow. The endosperm, which is the part of the seed that is the food store for the developing plant embryo. It usually contains starch, protein, and other nutrients. And the seed coat. The seed coat safeguards the internal components of the seed. The seed coat also communicates information about environmental stimuli to the internal seed structures. So what does a seed need to survive? It actually does not need soil, contrary to what the soil starter business would tell you. It needs water, oxygen, and proper temperature. So why doesn't it need soil? Because it has everything it needs. It has all of its nutrition there in the endosperm. I always found this absolutely fascinating, but seeds are an evolutionary adaptation to dry land. So as ocean plants adapted to land, they began to hold on to spores, which gave them a better chance of survival. Plants evolved most directly from the fossil plant Elkincenia polymorpha, which was a seed fern from the Devonian period. So we're talking 400 million years ago. The seed allowed the genetic material to be dormant in essentially a dehydrated state for long periods of time. Those seed ferns, and here's some illustrations of those, and you can see these little kind of encasings that held what were spores at one point. The seed ferns evolved into gymnosperms and eventually angiosperms. This evolution has resulted in the adaptation of plants to nearly every ecosystem on the planet and the development of the modern flora that we see today. So types of seed plants, there are the angiosperms, as I said, which are flowering plants, and there's approximately 260,000 species. And in these, the seeds develop in the ovaries of the flowers and are surrounded by a protective fruit. The gymnosperm is conifers and non-flowering plants. So there's only about 1,000 species of these. And in these, the seeds are formed in the unisexual cones, and the plants lack fruit or flowers. They rely on wind pollination. So what gives those flowering plants such an advantage to be, such a high number? And by the way, there are still seedless plants, for instance, ferns, horsetail, and different aquatic plants. They didn't go completely extinct, even though the seed fern did. So what gives these angiosperms or flowering plants such an advantage? The seeds are contained within the fruit, and the fruit is useful in attracting birds, mammals, insects, all of which helps spread the seed around, and they've all adapted together simultaneously. Thus, flowering plants are an integral part of the native ecosystem and food chain. So what does that even mean? It's such a buzzword right now, but what does the word native mean? It's a plant or animal that has evolved in a given place over a period of time sufficient to develop complex and essential relationships with the physical environment and other organisms in a given ecological community. So this is a definition by Doug Talamay and Rich Dark. And you can see here what is at the bottom of that food chain, native plants. So we have native plants adapted to their ecosystem being eaten by insects. So the plants are absorbing the energy from the sun. The insects take that on, the birds take that, and up is moves that energy through the entire food chain, all the way to us. So why use straight species native plants? As I said, they're the pillar of the food chain, the direct transfer of the sun's energy up the food chain. They're adapted to our climate over thousands or more of years. They need less water and soil amendment. They have more genetic variation, so they're more resilient to climate change, support wildlife. They follow the timeline of the area that they have evolved in, and their deep roots are beneficial to the soil, sequestering carbon. Pollinators are of direct benefit to local crops, vegetables, and fruit trees, and they have less serious pest issues. So this is a good question, and I get a lot of questions about this. What are the differences between a straight species native plant and a cultivar and a nativar? So most cultivars, which just means a plant that's bred for desirable traits, and a nativar is just a cultivar with native plant parents. It's the same idea. Most of them are propagated from cuttings rather than seed. So cuttings offer genetic consistency, faster growth, the preservation of desirable traits, but they come with genetic vulnerability from limited genetic variation. Sometimes in a commercial nursery, an entire aisle of plants will have the same DNA. So if there's extreme weather or a pest, the entire group of plants will have the same reaction. So we see this in the agricultural industry, but monoculture in general is not good for adaptability. Some cultivars are actually sterile. So when certain traits are emphasized and exaggerated, often the plant does not have enough energy to create seed or to create high quality nectar. So they have a lower ecosystem benefit. So not only might the birds and insects receive less nutrition, which can affect the broader food chain, but when a color or height is altered for aesthetic reasons, sometimes pollinators and birds don't even recognize the plant or can't use it in the same way. For instance, if the berries are bigger, the birds might not be able to eat it. And if a flower is modified to have double blooms, that often relates to sterility and definitely less nectar. So, but for the record, not all cultivars are created equally. There are some that function better than others in terms of an ecosystem support, but they should be, one small part of your collection of plants, not making up the entire collection, because they do have less functionality. So why harvest and grow your own native plants from seed? Well, that seems like, a lot of work, but the benefits are huge. And this is a quote from Heather McCargo from Eco Landscape Alliance. She says, a key benefit of growing native plants from seed is it's the best way to preserve genetic diversity within a species. In the wild, most plants reproduce by seed. Seeds develop when flowers are pollinated by insects or wind. So the mixing of genes of multiple individuals is actually happening in nature. So this is resulting in genetically diverse individual plants. And this variation is the wild plant's best strategy to adapt to future environmental conditions, as individuals differ in their ability to deal with drought, heat, flooding, cold, and pollution. So if you've ever seen that little bumblebee going around to the flowers, it's actually carrying, you can often see the pollen, multiple flowers worth of pollen. So there's already mixing going on that's creating more diversity. The highest ecosystem functionality is from straight species seed-grown plants. And they're the most reliable. So sometimes you may have the best of intentions and buy a non-organic but a native seed, and they can be treated with the neonicotinoid. So it's an insecticide coating which is used prophylactically, but you may or may not even have an issue with insect pests. And that has harmful repercussions throughout the ecosystem. So you know what you're getting when you're using your own seed. Collecting seeds, not to be belittled, saves money. So your straight species native plants are full of free seed. That's what they've evolved to do. So your wildflower garden is your very own seed library. It's easy and it's fun. You're also helping to spread high quality seed well past your yard. So if you've ever been on Crescent Trail here in the Rochester area, many of our local natural areas are really quite taken over by buckthorn and multiflora rose. And a lot of these plants are spread by birds eating the berries and passing on the seed. So when you're planting high quality ecosystem beneficial plants in your yard, it's not ending at your yard. The birds are taking that beyond your yard into natural areas and the wider landscape. So what are ecotype seeds? This is another buzzword, hearing a lot about it. They take the native idea a step further. So they're seeds collected from parent stock that have evolved over time and adapted to an area. Its unique soils, geology, temperature, rainfall, elevation, insects, diseases, pests, and the other environmental factors. So why do they matter? There's not a ton of research on this, but it intuitively makes sense. And I think there's a lot of research forthcoming. They may increase adaptability and resilience. So seed from your own ecoregion, where plants have been evolving over time, may increase that resiliency to climate variables unique to your area. So imagine, you're at a farmer's market and you can choose a rose mallow, which is native both in Florida and here, one that's an ecotype from Florida and one that's from maybe a plant from the Montezuma wetlands. It makes total sense that that plant might be carrying genetic information more unique to your area that is from the local ecotype seed. So when you are taking your seed from your yard, you're at least starting to write that story. You may not have gotten your seed from the ecoregion, but you are taking more seed that's starting to adapt to our area. So what is an ecoregion? I think this is, just a really fascinating concept, and you can find your ecoregion at the EPA.gov website, Ecoregions New York, and I have the link right there. I think this will be shared at a later point. So you can see the map here. Most of Greater Rochester is 83C, or the Ontario lowlands. So it was historically the eastern temperate forest with beech and sugar maple. And then really loamy, silty, fine textured soils made up of limestone and shale at their deeper layers. So that's a pretty unique kind of set of qualities. So what plants adapted to these? And that can now be found. There's a native plant finder, and you can type in your zip code and get the plants that have evolved in your area. So a lot of viewers tonight probably from a little further down, and you can see here that's ecoregion 60, which is the Northern Allegheny Plateau. So seed collection basics. I'm done with the overview. So etiquette. And this is from the North American Native Plant Society. So on private property, you should always get permission from the landowner before collecting seed. Take no more than 10% of the available seeds. You do not want to destroy a native plant colony or compromise creatures which depend on the seeds for food. If there are signs that someone else has already collected, you really shouldn't take any more. So learn which plants are common and which are rare in your area. Never collect from rare species except as part of an authorized species recovering program approved by the appropriate government regulatory body. And here you can find a list of endangered and rare plants in New York State. So when should I collect seeds? So fall right now is pretty ideal. If you wait until winter, everything will be already gone to seed, so you don't have to split hairs about whether it's ready or not, but you also may not get very much. And so it might also not be as high of quality. So when the plant is showing signs of self-dispersal, so it's splitting or opening up, is another sign that you can collect seed. The plant is usually done flowering, the petals have fallen off, and or the stem is brown. Note different plants of the same species may be ready at different times. I like to get seed samples that are representative of various bloom times and features to keep that biodiversity high in my seed stock. Was there a question, Sarah?
No, I shared the link to the ecoregion page in the
Oh,
chat.
okay.
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
just trying to work in real time to try to convey what you're referring to.
Okay, sounds good. So how do I prep and store seeds? So after you collect the seed and it's got all those signs of readiness, you still want to dry it out. So I tend to put a dehumidifier on and put it in a low humidity environment for about 2 weeks. And some seed will appear to be quite a bit more dry. So this, 1 to 2 weeks, depending on how dry it already is. You want to discard any flat seed, and you can check for viability by doing a float test. So that is just submerging the seed in water for about 15 minutes, and anything that floats up to the top is not viable. You can get rid of it. Don't waste your time. It's not going to germinate. Once dry and clean, most seed can be stored at room temperature with no special treatment and will remain viable for a few years. Some seeds do better when they stay moist. And I noticed that, if you look on the massive seed website of Prairie Moon in Wisconsin, they have seed codes. And I have noticed that those are very accurate. So if you try to grow Phlox paniculata, it really doesn't germinate well unless you keep it refrigerated. So I have the same thing with New York ironweed and blazing star. So after you harvest it, get it right in the refrigerator and don't store it at room temperature. But those are really exceptions. There's, and you still get some germination, but you'll find a much higher level if you can keep them cold. And all of this is happening, we're talking about storage before stratification, but again, you can store them longer than that. Some seeds, these are the tricky codes. Some seeds need a double dormancy. So that means in nature, they're actually going through 2 seasons of freeze and thaw cycles. Things like black elderberry, a lot of native shrubs. And so when you mimic that at home, you don't really have to wait 2 years. And that'll make a little more sense when we go through it. But you're doing like cycles of 60-day warm, 60-day hot. 60-day warm, 60-day cold, and then, rotating that. So it's really more like a year. Some seeds require an initial nicking or scarification to kind of break down that seed coat, or using boiling water, letting them soak overnight. Something like New Jersey tea benefits from that. So what is threshing? It's the process of separating the seed from the chaff, and the chaff is just the husk or the encasing of the seed. And you're going to see me do this in the videos, but it can be done by sieves, screens, or just pulling it apart. Seeds can also be contained in berries. So the berries can be, eaten if they're edible. And you can spit out the seed, like with beach plum. That's how I get those seeds. but they can also be soaked and squeezed. Or if you have a large scale project, you can process berries with hard seed, like those of the dogwood species, and Prunus serratina, which is wild black cherry, in a food processor. So if you want to see this, if you're looking at some pretty hardy shrub seeds and you don't know what to do with them, you can look at my YouTube page for details on that. Okay. So I try to pick flowers that are around just in case you already have them and you could use them to collect seed, because this is the perfect time. So the first video is going to cover Penstemon hirsutus, but it absolutely applies to Penstemon digitalis as well. So these are great plants. They're a little different. They both are early bloomers, with Penstemon hirsutus being the New York native. It's 2 weeks earlier bloom time. But they're wonderful plants for hummingbirds and native bees.
So these seed pods are Penstemon hirsutus, and also known as hairy beard tongue, and these bloom a couple weeks before Penstemon digitalis. So I just harvested these. The rest of these I had gotten some earlier in the week. And I'm going to show you Penstemon digitalis here that isn't quite ready yet. You can see some of the seed heads are actually green. I would leave these for another couple weeks until they look a little more like this, brown and starting to open up ever so slightly. And this one is ready. The seed pods are showing signs of self-dispersal. They're opening ever so slightly. The plant is brown, dry, completely dormant. So the seeds to Penstemon, all Penstemon species are really tiny, and the pods are really hard. You kind of have to snap them in between your fingers. And we're going to do it right in this paper bag so that all the seeds fall into the bag. You can hear them kind of crunching and then spilling out. So there's lots of seeds in each seed pod. Once you're done with that, you're going to further screen it. So the process of threshing is when you're removing the seed from the plant material. And screening is what you do once you've got them roughly separated and you want to start really cleaning it out further. So we still have lots of plant material mixed in with the seeds just from the process of rough extracting. And as you can see, as I shake it, I'm left with just the plant material in the sifter. And this is just a common kitchen sifter. And then pure live seed underneath on the plate. And this can go right into a storage bag. As you can tell, these are tiny, but there are hundreds of seeds here from one flower head.
Okay, so the next plant I'm going to cover is Baptisia australis, and this is a beautiful, almost a shrubby perennial. It's about 4 feet high and wide. It's a nitrogen fixer as part of the legume family. So this is an example of one that does need some scarification. So I'm going to show you that in this video. Otherwise, very easy to process.
Here I have a patch of 3 blue false indigo or Baptisia plants, and you can see the seed pods. That's Penstemon digitalis in the way, and they are kind of a purplish color. So how to know when these seed heads are ready? I pick the absolute darkest ones. I don't wait for them to split open. Typically, they're bulging and almost ready. But you will lose a lot of seed if you wait too long. These are super easy to process. So I'm just going to break them open. The shaft is really barely attached. It's a non-issue. I'll probably screen them once just to get any little remnants. There's some little tiny sticks that held them into the pod. That is the shaft. But otherwise, it's just the pod, and it's super easy to remove. So there is one tricky step to processing blue false indigo seeds. So as a part of the legume family, the seed coat is really strong. There's like a little bit of shine on them. And that needs to be broken down a bit. So there's several methods by which you could do this. But I'm going to go over scarification, which is, in this case, I will be using sandpaper to just soften that seed coat, break it down just a little bit. I do one side and then I reverse it. And there's no need to do this for too long. You'll just see that the shininess turns matte, and there's a little bit of a powdery residue. So one thing to keep in mind is that this process of scarification is for spring planting. So if you save these seeds and you keep them dry all winter and they're ready to go in the spring, you want to scarify them like I just did, and then stratify them for a short period of time. You really only need about 10 days. And then you can plant them directly and they should germinate fairly easily. If you are planting directly outside in the fall, you do not need to scarify them. The long process in the Northeast of freeze and thaw cycles, you don't want them to germinate too soon. So you keep that hard coat, seed coat intact.
So that would be the same process and the same stratification for Senna urbicarpa, so the wild senna that is also native here. All right, and we're gonna jump into some Joe Pye, which I'm sure we all have a little bit of.
This is Eutrochium purpureum, sweet Joe Pye. And this is here in my front garden bed in Pittsburgh, New York. You can see that they have gone to seed. They are ready to be harvested. They look almost hairy, no more blooms on these. Because they're in the aster family, they have a lot of fibrous material. It kind of acts like a little helicopter. So each seed looks like a needle, but it's attached to all of this fibrous material, which is considered to be part of the shape. And I'm going to clip it like this so I don't lose too much seed. And there it is. So not too much to harvesting this Joe Pye. Basically, I'm going to kind of pull the seed heads down. You can see that the seed is starting to collect here in the corners. Not going to worry too much about the shape. This is a helicopter-like material that helps them travel through the air. I am going to pass them through my sifter to clean them up just a little bit. Now, this is really messy if you're not doing it in a bag or directly from the plant into a bag. But ultimately, these are surface sown, and you want to put a little bit of damp, coarse sand over the top to keep them from blowing away, especially if you're direct sowing. But even in your pots, if you're going to over. This is Eutrochium purpureum.
Okay, that was the end of that one anyway. And then we're gonna do some butterfly weed. I'll show you a little bit about harvesting that.
Lepias tuberosa is an amazing plant. I finally have one that's ready to harvest. I'm going to show you today a method that's a little easier than just dumping everything out all together and trying to separate it. I want to add that milkweed has an irritant. It's an irritant to the skin. So I tend to process milkweed seeds with gloves. However, orange milkweed has the least of it. So I don't use gloves on these, but I do process it outside because the fibers are insidious if you get them into your indoor air. So what we're looking for is signs of self-dispersal. So obviously they're you can see the spiky pods. They're on the way to being ready, but I really only see one that's breaking apart. And you can see here the shape, or in this case, the kind of fibrous material is sticking out. So I'm going to go ahead and harvest this one. I'm trying to pull out the shape without removing the seeds yet so they don't blow away. And if I'm outside, I can kind of just let that go. as you can see, what I have left is pretty much just seeds in the pod and a big pile of chaff. So you're trying to slowly pull out the chaff using pressure on the pod to leave the seeds inside. And it's a little bit of an easier method than just dumping it all out and trying to separate it.
Okay, and I think it's important to note that it's also called floss, but the silk that's in there is the fiber is used for birds' nests. So birds do use that. So if you kind of let it fly into the air, there will be potentially a use for it for insulation. And I believe this is my last one of harvesting, and then I have one more that is going over the milk jug stratification.
Hello, everybody. I'm here at Powder Mills Park in Pittsford, New York. I want to show you a patch growing natively of Helianthus helianthoides, fall sunflower. This is a beautiful yard landscaping plant, and it's so wonderful to see it growing in the wild. It blooms from June through August and then into September. You can see some in the back have gone to seed. So this plant services birds. Birds eat the seed as it dries at this time of year. Pollinators use the nectar. So moths, butterflies, native bees, and all around all-star plant, one of my favorites. You can see it's pretty easy to see the chaff versus the seed. You can really just pull these apart and you don't really need to do much. So I've run these through the strainer a few times. I'm going to keep going to try to isolate that seed from the chaff, but I'm getting there. And in this case, I'm pulling apart some of the chaff as it's lighter and it kind of comes together into an area. Here you can see on the left is the chaff, and there was a lot more than this, but this was the final cleaning. And on the right is the seed. Hello. Hello.
Okay, so now lastly, we're going to talk about stratification and different ways to do that. So most native plants must go through a cold period called stratification in order to germinate. So the seed coat in plants from our area, so not necessarily the tropics, in fact, indeed not the tropics or warmer climates, but our seeds are adapted to our strange cold winters. So the seed coat must go through a freeze-thaw cycle in order to be broken down and to germinate. That's the cue that the endosperm and the cotyledon are getting, from that seed coat to germinate. So some options. You can plant late in the fall through winter, so any day really that the ground is not frozen for spring germination. The pro to this method is that it's so easy. You can plant anytime, as I said. The con is that it's likely to get eaten or disturbed. I often process my seeds and, winter stratify them in multiple ways, and then I dump the rest of the packet, which contains at least 30 seeds, into my beds. And I often get one plant in the next year or the year after, a total of one. So it does not have a high success rate for me. I think if you protected it and maybe put straw over it, might be a little higher. You can also artificially create stratification by placing seed with a damp grow medium, such as sand or cocoa coir, in bags in the refrigerator until spring. So the pro to this method is that germination is timely. The con is the same. Germination is almost too timely, and it may happen when it is too cold for young roots. So when you look at the stratification codes on your seed packet, if you're buying seed, it might say C60, so it needs 60 days cold stratification. And like clockwork in your refrigerator, this is going to happen. So if you put them in late December, they'll be ready in late February, and there's not much you can do there. So it can be a bit, challenging to time that right. Because in nature, of course, there's warmer days, colder days, more variability. So you could also stratify very similarly, damp grow medium, and leave the bags outside. So the damp medium and this, everything stays damp. So this is a really good method, really easy. So the pro here is that the seeds germinate naturally on their own time according to the weather patterns. But the con is that if you miss that germination and you don't transplant them, the germinated seeds die pretty quickly in the bag. And it's usually too cold for them to survive, outside at that point. You have to bring them in and then harden them off. So my favorite by far is the milk carton method. The pro to this method is that the seeds germinate when they're ready. So if you don't know, we're going to go over this. The milk carton goes outside. It doesn't have a cap on it. So it's sealed and it's like a mini greenhouse. So the seeds germinate when they are ready. The seeds are protected and they're safe in the container for quite some time. Seedlings are already hardened off. You can plant a lot. It's pretty low maintenance. The con, and this is the only one that I have right now, I may develop more cons as time goes on, but you want to make sure your potting mix doesn't have any water retention additives and that your drainage holes are functioning, they're not being blocked, because your seed could get too wet and become moldy. So after your seeds are germinated, you would plant in larger containers with potting soil, or when warm enough, especially with the milk carton method, you could go right into the ground because they're already hardened off and they're pretty big compared to the other methods. Okay, so we collect the seed in the fall, but you really can't start stratification until winter solstice at the absolute earliest. So this is a fun thing to do over holiday break. So this is my last video, and then I'll show you some results of what those milk jugs look like in the spring.
Welcome to my seed cave. I'm going to show you around a little bit and show you what seeds I have drying out. So I have some penstemon seeds, some clover's root, and you can see lots and lots of little seeds or plant materials. So the things that are in paper bag are drying out. They're not yet processed. And then if they are in these little plastic bags, then they are processed and they are ready either for refrigeration or to be stored just as is. Most things are just stored once they're dried out as is. I'm starting to get ready for winter stratification. It is fine to prep everything and prepare yourself, but you really shouldn't put any perennials out there until December, January. A really good time to do this is winter solstice. So your first step is just to measure about 4.5 inches, and then you're going to cut it all the way around, leaving space at the handle for a hinge. So I like to get mine started with an X-Acto knife, but I do finish it off with scissors, which is quite a bit easier to control. And if you're using an actual milk jug, this one was for water, you want to rinse it out with soap and water really good. The other thing to keep in mind is that you want your milk jug to be translucent, not one of those white opaque ones. You're going to need the light to get into your area for seeding. So now you can see I have it cut all the way around and I've left a hinge. So this allows you to seal it back up, okay? Something I didn't mention, but that is very important. You do not need the lid. You're gonna stick that in the recycling. This actually acts like a flue. You want water and moisture, snow, to be able to get into here and for the air to release from the top. And then our next step after this is to put drainage holes in the bottom. And drainage is so important over the winter. So you want to make sure that they're, a little bit on the angle here and not being blocked by whatever ground you put this on. And of course, there's, many ways to do this. I am going to use a drill, but you could use a hot screwdriver, you can just use an X-Acto. And there you go. So I'm going to finish that off. So now I've got about 5 drainage holes here. And the next step is to fill this with potting soil. You want to go up pretty far. I would say about 3.5 inches. The nice thing about this method is you can leave your plants in there for a long time. So right now we are at the end of September. I'm going to run this all the way through, but just so you know, you're not finishing this part until December, end of December. So you first want to dampen the soil and then put your seeds in. I'm going to be putting in beaked hazelnut because I actually want to be able to remove these, and that'll make it a lot easier on me. But remember, this method could be for anything. You can put acorns in here, got a bunch of white oaks, or more likely for perennials. Now, keep in mind if you have a seed that's really fine, like surface sown, like Culver's root or Joe Pye, you can put some damp, coarse sand over it and wet it, but leave it right on the surface. So labeling is extra important with this method. You need a UV resistant garden marker or some kind of wax pencil to write on the top of the milk carton. And you also need a less important that it's UV resistant, but a tag for the inside. In this case, I'm using a popsicle stick. And the reason you need both is that if your seed does start to germinate, you want to be able to, in the early summer or late spring, remove this. It ends up becoming like a planter. You've got enough soil in there that you can get some decent top growth. So when you cut that off, you want to know what you have. I think that's been one of my biggest challenges with growing my own plants is keeping things labeled because it's really hard to ID things at the seedling stage. Okay, and now I'm sealing it back up. I find that this is a lot easier if you use multiple pieces of tape. And there it is, ready to go. This is my favorite method of seed sowing because it's so effective. The jug acts like a little greenhouse. The opening at the top is a flue. It will, allow the moisture in, and then it will create condensation that will drip down the sides. If you don't see that in the winter, you should check it once a week. Then you want to add a little bit of water. You've got to keep those seeds moist for proper germination. So inside the jug is going to be warmer than outside, especially on a sunny day. Quite a bit warmer, like again, the effect of a greenhouse. So when your seed is ready to germinate, it's really going to proliferate in there. You'll find that most things, when you take the lid off in the spring, have reached a really high level of growth. They're 3 or 4, sometimes 5 inches. And the nice thing is you can cut the top off at the hinge and just let it go as if it's in a planter for as long as you need until you're ready to pot it up. You're going to have a lot, most likely, to pot up if you do several of these like I do. So I hope it's successful for you, and I look forward to hearing from you. Welcome.
Oh, okay. And then the very last page, I'm sorry, this is going a little long, is just the kind of results. And I'll, let's see, we could probably skip that, but I'll quickly get back to that.
Well,
okay. And there you can see some of the results.